Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to another tutorial. This time we're looking at Eyes on the Prize for Inhumans in Mutant Extremists target US Senators against the pretty infamous at this point Mystique team for it, right? Mystique's leadership is pretty obscene on this scenario because the extract refund power lets both Juggernaut and Hulk, which I'm going to be naming Joke potentially a few times in the video, so as they both do the same thing, right? With that leadership, which is get a refund to do their extra movement option, right? So nothing stops the Juggernaut. The Juggernaut, because after moving with unstoppable momentum, gets to 3 power, so you can pick up an extract and then move away. And Hulk can do the same thing with Gamma Leap, because he gets 3 power, picks up, refunds, goes back to 3, and then moves Gamma Leaps away. So both of these guys do roughly the same thing for the team in terms of being able to steal your opponent's extract. So whichever extract we don't pick up, they can come and grab with Hulk and Juggernaut. So outside of the Joke combo, they also have Deception with Mystique, Pyrotechnics with Pyro, and of course Do You Know Who I Am for Juggernaut as like really the key cards. But the one that really changes everything on run 1 is Deception. This card forces you to keep your models within 2 of each other, otherwise they can move you. And what that does is, if you're like standing around here at max 1, for the sake of the example, let's say Black Bolt went and grabbed this objective. And Mystique could move, easily get within 4 because the range is insane, and then Deception you towards their team. So they would be able to punch you with Hulk or Juggernaut, still steal an extract with the other one, and probably end with like 5 extracts if they manage to daze you. Mystique also gets to shoot you once in this whole effect, so you're looking at taking a bunch of damage, maybe getting a model daze on the first round and being super out of position. So what you want to be doing and looking at, and this is where Eyes on the Prize comes in, is making sure you stay within 2 of a model. Right, so in this case, it's Rhino. Why? Because Rhino is amazing, especially on this kind of scenario where the extract is... There's a lot of extracts, so this is a robbery will be relevant. The fact that you cannot move more than once because of the scenario, the extracts is not super limiting when you have access to Stampede. And because he's a big base model, it lets you do a key play for the team. Because you want to place at max 2. If you're like slightly off center because of terrain like here, gives yourself a little angle. Place at max 2. We're still going to be using Black Bolt. The goal will be to use Eyes on the Prize. So Black Bolt was deployed here, so I would grab the power off of Crystal, because she's probably not really going to need it. Then you'd spend those powers for Eyes and grabbing this Senator. So now, if I were my opponent in this specific situation, right, depending on the terrain and where the different sizes of terrains are, it might influence who in between Juggernaut and Hulk moves. In this case, I'm fairly certain I would not risk chance of Hulk being stuck and not getting on top of the terrain with his movement. So I would just go with Juggernaut and be safe. Juggernaut would move once, get his 2 extra power, move again to be at max 1 of this Senator, pick it up, get his refund power, then use Nothing Stop with the goal of ending within 1 of the canister, so like roughly around here, right? It's a push, so they have to do the full distance and be centered, so it's a bit trickier to manage a perfect landing, but they're gonna be roughly around here, right? Maybe a bit more to the side, but something around it like this. Now we definitely want to pick this one up, because even though maybe Hulk doesn't reach, I think he does, to be honest, but let's say that he couldn't, I would not want to risk it, so then we'd need to pick up this one. You could go with either Rhino or Medusa. In this case, I would favor Medusa for 2 reasons, actually. The first one is fairly simple. Rhino can potentially grab one of these extracts the same way Juggernaut and Hulk does. The other one is you don't want Rhino to be standing there, because then Hulk can just walk, well, advance twice, and then throw Rhino into Black Bolt, and this can be devastating. But if you place at max 1 to the side, so in this case what you want to do is just make sure you clear the terrain. For instance, yeah, like this, so roughly where she was. You should be within 2 of Black Bolt easily, right, as you can see. And then you pick up this Senator. Now, one thing to note is maybe you're scared of Hulk throwing this terrain into into Medusa, right? Because he could double walk and throw it. So to avoid this, I would probably grab, before moving, right? Medusa was here. Before moving, you would want to grab, in this case, a power off of Pyro and give it to Medusa for Bryce protection. And so this way, she's protected from the dumpling restaurant being thrown at her. If Hulk chooses to double move for this, it also gives her an extra power so she's ready. Because one thing to note, right? I keep talking about Hulk. Let's just show how far Hulk can reach, right? Because once Hulk decides to go, he can either Gamma Leap and get here, right? Which is easily in range of whatever he wants to do here. Otherwise, he can double move and throw the size 3 terrain. Why I would want to do this is because right now Medusa is covered from it against all the attacks that could come from around here. In this case, it's probably mostly Mystique, but I'm fairly certain that Mystique could reach, right? Like if she moves, right? So Mystique could move onto the Senator and shoot Medusa if she so wanted. That's why if you eat the terrain first, right, the restaurant, if it's thrown at you and you don't have brace, you take a bunch of damage and then maybe you just get dazed by Mystique and then you're in a pretty bad spot. Speaking of which, at some point Mystique is probably gonna go grab this Senator and shoot Medusa. Hulk is likely a little bit further back because I'm assuming they Gamma Leap and just punch Medusa. That's what I would do if that were them, because if they get the wild, right? If they get the wild, they could like push you like around here. That's not guaranteed, but if they get it, and then they could also look at potentially Deception if you've already moved Rhino. If you haven't, I see here it shows red, but that's just classic TTS. If you place at max range, right? If you do the max 2 like this, sometimes it places you basically barely outside, so it doesn't super matter, but you can always just throw in a little bit backwards if your opponent prefers. But if you've declared your intent clearly, no player should be arguing about this. As long as you say I place at max 2 and they see you do the place, even if you end up barely outside, proper gaming etiquette says it shouldn't be an issue. One thing that's really cool for them with Toad, and then you wonder, but what about that token? How do they score it? Well, that's where our good buddy Toad comes in, right? Because if you look at it, Toad can easily get within 2 of a Senator with a single move action. He cannot move again after, so whatever. But let's say he goes here, grabs, gets his refund. He can then be within 2 of this side objective. And because he interacts at range 2 with his tongue, can then use the leadership and put the X-Force, well, not X-Force, Brotherhood token, in this case it's X-Force for some reason, but put the Brotherhood token from the Freedom Force onto this canister, which is pretty neat because now they're scoring it, they're still grabbing this objective. This one is on Mystique. She probably got some power from shooting at Medusa. And then if we're looking at something along those lines for board state, it depends who they've moved when, right? Because now I've moved a bunch of models super fast, but if they go for these plays kind of quickly, right? One thing you always want to do is on our end, we've got this kind of move that's good at delaying doing irrelevant stuff, which is just sending Crystal chilling over here and hopefully shoot Juggernaut. See, in this case, no. If the terrain was a little bit different, maybe we could, or maybe, yeah. If you stand on top here instead, maybe you reach. No. All right. So it depends where Juggernaut ends his movement, but maybe he's in range, maybe he's not. Maybe all can be depending on where they place, etc. But otherwise you're fine just chilling there for now. And that's always something you can do to delay doing the, let's call them, more relevant actions, because your live models are gonna be, is mostly gonna be Rhino in this scenario for round 1 plays. Because Pyro is honestly just gonna be at some point probably just double moving onto this objective, right? This is likely what I would do with Pyro. Maybe if like Medusa gets super diced and she takes 1 billion damage from these guys and gets dazed, and maybe you just move in and then shoot them or something. But more likely than not, we're looking at something like this, right? Where you just move forward, get in a position to threaten maybe Toad next round. Right, make sure to be within 4 of him if possible. Alright, same thing with Crystal. Like, we couldn't reach in a single move action, but then what you want to do is like double move to get in range. Right, you would double move to be in range, so like, hey, if you don't do anything, I can double tap you next round. Not super threatening at first, but it's energy. Maybe something good comes out of it. You're gonna be doing 3 attacks. It's not gonna be crazy, but hey, maybe you just want to get ready to roll dices. Sometimes it's gonna help you, sometimes not, but better to be in a position to do it than not. But yeah, so like for now, like if they didn't get the wild, Medusa is here. That's another factor, right? I'm assuming maybe Pyro is their last model to go. Maybe it's gonna be Hulk. If it's Hulk and then Pyro has moved and picked this up, it changes your dynamic. But one thing at some point that you can do with Rhino, once there's only 1 extract left, right? As long as there's 2, you don't want to do this. But the moment there's 1 left, maybe just go and steal it, right? Maybe just go and grab the last one. That can be an option. Depending on where Mystique has finished her movement. Depending on where Mystique has finished her movement, maybe, that's a big maybe, but depending on where she finishes her movement, sometimes Rhino can get in range for a shot. Not in this case, but, and then depending on the damage Medusa took, maybe you can be transferring power to Rhino on the first round, right? Like, if you took some damage because Hulk has gone in, right? And then say you haven't moved Pyro yet, depends, and maybe they haven't done Mystique yet, right? Depends the sequencing. That's why I don't want to go too deep. You want to look at potential punishes. The most standard thing I would be looking at is the moment they pick up 1. I'm assuming Mystique is going to go before Pyro. The moment they pick up and there's only 1 left, I would try to just grab it with Rhino, the last one. If we were looking at something like this as the like more complete board state, if you want, and say this has been thrown into Medusa, and then Mystique has moved to shoot Medusa after Hulk did this, right? Maybe like Hulk like did a gamma leap, did a punch, got like some damage in, enough like to do a throw, but not enough to like do anything else. So then maybe we use brace and we're looking at something like this. It's hard to say, right? Because there's a lot of dice rolls now involved, but yeah, we're just throwing a little situation to show. The one thing to note is if you do this and Pyro has not activated yet, is that they can like easily be within 3 for pyrotechnics and then shoot you. If they're lucky and get the wild, they can pyrotechnics you, which can be pretty awkward. So, you know, there's a lot of factors to keep in mind, right? Like Pyro versus Rhino is awkward. But like if they go with Pyro fast and then Pyro grabs it earlier, and Medusa, maybe they haven't gone with Hulk yet, then maybe we're looking at just because the model, like the game plan is basically try to deal less with these guys and more with these guys, generally speaking. But yeah, there's a few factors, right? Depending on how they sequence Pyro versus Mystique. Because if they went with Pyro first and not Mystique, then you pick up this one with Rhino, etc., right? I'm already rambling a lot, but as long as you do like that start, you're looking at either a 4-2 or 3-3 on extracts, depending on what you do with Rhino, right? Rhino could go for one of these, but that's going to depend on how your opponent goes, depending on what they prioritize, right? Are they going with Mystique? Are they going with Pyro? Are they going with Hulk? And the outcome of these things, because depending on what Mystique does, right? Maybe they go with Mystique super fast, shoot Medusa, still little bit of damage, and then you're happy. Maybe they spike and then you're in like deep trouble, but you have a bunch of power, so Rhino gets fed power, and then you can do like a stampede round 1, right? If you can do a stampede round 1, it's pretty neat. You know, maybe you choose to ignore the terrain risk and just feed power on Rhino round 1 as much as possible, which would be 2. It's not crazy, but you know, if you give him 2 right away from Pyro, for instance, or maybe they do something different with Hulk and then you give power to Pyro for a firewall. There's a lot of options, right? but most of your plays are going to come from these two models on that scenario, depending on the sequencing of everything after this, right? Which is why I don't want to go like, right? Like the only things that are fairly certain is like Juggernaut would be on the one side after having stolen, Toad would be on the other one, placing the token. So these models are free to go wherever they need to. Well, grab senators and exert pressure in this case, right? We know Hulk is likely finishing somewhere around here, but we don't know where exactly. Pyro is probably standing there, or, you know, something along those lines. But that's it for this one. I don't want to go too deep into it. We're just gonna look real quick at the other tools that, for instance, this team is bringing, right? We've got pyrotechnics, which with Pyro will give you, if you play the same squad at 19, some interesting options, because in between Crystal, like here, because of the secure, they're kind of spread apart, but at some point the Incinerate from either Crystal or Pyro will pile up on those models, and then maybe you can use Pyrotechnics for some VP swings. This is a robbery, right? If you can give power to Rhino on round 1 and double move, you can maybe even potentially, like, you've deployed, you move once, you move again. We could have Mystique because she didn't place at max 1, and we could on Pyro. So that's also a way, right? Like, especially if Medusa took damage, and you could maybe feed another power to Rhino and then use, like, this is a robbery to steal one off of Mystique or Pyro. Could be an option, right? The leadership is so versatile. But yeah, this is a robbery and Terragenesis, which means that as long as you're keeping the game kind of close, right? Like, as long as you can get either 6-4 or 5-5 on round 1, depending on what you choose to do with Rhino, what happens with Medusa, does she get tased? There's a few factors, right? But depending on what happens exactly in the sequencing, you're going to be looking at a score of 6-4 or 5-5 most of the time. I've played this scenario twice against that team. So far, I've had one game where it was 6-4 and the other one 5-5. And it was due to, like, terrain and, like, a few little decisions from both players and how it went. So, like, I've seen both happen, and I think this is what's normally going to be happening in this specific instance of, like, Infinity Formula Mutant Extremist. Yeah, you're looking at a 5-5 or 6-4 split, which means that, like, if you look at this, if by round 3 you've maintained something similar, ideally not 6 for them, because if they do 6, 12, 18, you lose. So they do 6. If it's 6-4, you hopefully need, well, you have priority, right? So that's one thing that to keep in mind. And then in this case, if Mystique moved to be in range of Medusa to shoot Medusa, then you're in range to Braid Bash Mystique, so that's pretty interesting. But, like, one thing to keep in mind is basically you're going to be looking at a game that ends by round 3 roughly, but, like, it's often going to be around, you're both probably going to be around 10, 11 points by around start of round 3. And then if you can, like, Terragenesis, you can get a little lead. Manage to do 5-5, then it's 10-10. Terragenesis on round 2 would give you 2 extra victory points, so then you only need to score 4 while they need to score 6. So if you can do 5-5, that's ideal. But, like, even if it's 6-4, and then on the following round you can hopefully bring that back to, like, a little less, which is easier said than done, obviously, right? Like, but if you can, and say they score 5 on the following round and you score 5, then you'd be looking at 11-9. But then with Terragenesis, you catch up to 11-11, and then if you both score 5 again, it would be 16-16. So this is kind of like what you're looking at in terms of goals, and that's where Terragenesis is super relevant. Normally, at some point, you're gonna leave, like, Pyro, Mystique, or Toad on 1 from, like, some attacks or trolls or something, and then you just finish them off with it. If you leave them on 2, it's a bit dicier, and then you might not get it, but hopefully you do. And that's going to be it for this one. Hopefully it can help you prepare for that matchup a little bit better. Always place Black Bolt off of the token, and be sure to be slightly inside of the 2. Not by much, right? Like, here you can see just a little bit, because if you don't, if you place at exactly max 2, you're gonna have issues to place, like, a small base within 2 and within one of the objectives. But if you're slightly inside of the 2, not by much, right? Like if you look to the side around, you also are not at max, exactly max from Rhino. You have to be like slightly in. I prefer doing it with the token, but yeah, as you can see, just a little bit in is the ideal positioning so that you're in on both sides no matter what. Well, that's one thing that you'll have to practice a little bit because yeah, if you do it a little too fast, you can get screwed and then that's not right. But yeah, the key thing here is you're not within 2 that way of Hulk. If you double move, so he cannot throw you on round 1. They could still throw Medusa, right, with Hulk if they just double move throw. But that's fine. And then Deception you potentially because you're within 4, and Rhino is like potentially chilling somewhere around here. So yeah, just keep this in mind. You have to be careful with your positioning. Alright, that's gonna be it for this one. Thanks for watching.